A lot of information, some of it similar and some of it not, but I bet you all have a lot of questions.
Hi, I'm Emily Sheketoff with the American Library Association, and um, I just want to make a pitch when you or people in the audience are talking about early childhood to the public, to policy leaders, to educators. You promote the collaboration with public libraries and school libraries. It's the public library who really is serving children and their families starting at birth. And you talk about how important early childhood education is. Well, the public librarians are the ones who are trying very hard to do that. But when no educators and when no policy people include them in these conversations, we're not included in policy development. So you really need to change the way you talk and include us. We're not talking about completely separated. It needs to be a collaboration right through into elementary school where you bring in the school librarian so that when you really want to make a difference for children, you really start at birth with their parents, working with children and their parents. After all, we're there with all sorts of integrating play and reading and language, hitting all the points you've been making, but rather than at 3 or 4 or 5, we're starting with infants and toddlers and their parents so that they really can be a child's best first teacher.
Thank you so much. Could I answer that? Because I'm on the Chicago Public Library Board, and one of my tasks is to bring the early childhood perspective to the board. They've never had an early childhood person on it before. So the alliance is now being made, I think, much more sharply than it has before.
I just wanted to add to that because, as you probably know, I'm a lover of libraries. And I've done a great deal of work on them. But one of the things I think is really central for all of you to be aware of is that the Common Core is spot on in terms of the emphasis on libraries and text. When we think about text as being a promoter of oral language development, even for those parents who cannot read to their children, we find that even using a book and telling a story through text enables children to learn so many words in such a wonderful, developmentally appropriate way. When I go to the library, what I'm struck with is everybody is called a patron. All of a sudden, those poverty differences are no more. Everybody is respected and noted as someone who is important. So I do make a plea for public libraries as the text-based source for so many wonderful things, starting at birth. We know some of our baby programs are just, more popular than any other programs in our little town. So I'm glad you bring that up.
Hi, I'm Linda Bevilacqua. I'm the president of the Knowledge Foundation. And hi, Susan, long time no see. We are actively involved in working in the state of New York with preschool as well as pre-K to grade 2 literacy. And I'm a little bit confused and a little bit worried as I listened to this panel as kind of an outside listener. What we're seeing when we work with pre-K teachers in professional development is universally, everybody wants to do a good job, right? But they're confused because they feel like they're getting mixed messages. And I feel like I got a mixed message this morning that I just want to take an opportunity perhaps to give, and I don't know if it's Dr. Almond or Joan or Mrs. Almond, give an opportunity to you to clarify. In talking, particularly, it struck me that in citing the Perry Preschool Curriculum Project, which is a project that took place quite some time ago, has been highly criticized in terms of the manner in which that study was conducted, as well as analyzed, that we send a mixed message. I think it's important, for example, to point out that that study was done through self-report by those participants. And one of the things that I can remember almost laughing to myself as I looked at it and said, okay, so now they're saying that the play group emphasis was had better outcomes for kids than it was direct instruction, capital D, capital I. And I thought, well, gee, maybe it means something different. Maybe it means that the kids who are in DI were more forthright in answering those questions as a self-report piece. And I say that in a way that is ludicrous, simply to make the point that I'm worried when you say instructional academic programs do not help children, particularly children who are in need and in poverty. I would like to think, as I listen, for example, to Susan describing an appropriate approach, and the articles in the papers that were disseminated, I think, do a very nice job of that. Play is absolutely a part of a good, high-quality preschool program. As Dr. Bowman said, there are, however, differences in the value of different kinds of play, and teachers are not always necessarily aware of those. So could you speak to that whole study and what your intent is in sharing that? What is your vision, particularly in that you indicated that you were not in favor of the Common Core state standards? What is your vision of an appropriate program?
Let me start with the last statement. I didn't say I wasn't in favor of them. I do have probably more mixed feelings about them than some other people may have, but I'm not in favor of the kindergarten standards being part of those standards. I don't think you can start at the 12th grade and step things down to the kindergarten and get appropriate standards for kindergarten. I think you're much better off starting with preschool and going up, and how high up you go in that way is, I would at least include kindergarten, but there's also arguments for going up through second grade. It's just a different way of learning that takes place with younger children than what takes place with older children, and I don't feel the Common Core standards recognize that for kindergarten. And I was for a long time a preschool kindergarten teacher, so I have strong views on this subject. But they don't extend to the whole of Common Core. I don't feel knowledgeable enough to comment on that. Now, with the HighScope study, and I found your comments interesting, I don't quite know what to say. I wish we had a dozen long-term studies like that we could look at. We have the German one, we have this one. There may be a couple of others around, but there's not much. And that's a disgrace, in my view, that we have not looked at a basic question about early education and done it thoroughly with good comparisons and over a long period of time. We have lots of short-term studies, but like the HighScope one, they show positive gains for almost everything. The preschool comparison study also did. I have a videotape done at the end of that first year where HighScope just says it's the same no matter what you do with the children. But it didn't turn out to be. And I think that the learning disabilities, as far as I know, that was recorded during their school time. The other issues were self-reported. It's hard to think that somebody would be frank about being married and living with their partner and not being frank about that. I don't know. About felonies, I really don't know. I'd have to go back and talk with the HighScope people again. I have spoken with them a number of times before we started talking about that research, because I wanted to make sure it was as solid as could be. But one can always continue to question it. I understand that. What I think about play is this. I think children use play to digest everything they're learning. They make it their own through play. And that's why I think it is important to have it in preschool. And I know this is an area where Barbara Bowman and I see things a little bit differently, even if children only have 2.5 hours.
I think they should play. I just don't think it should be in school if you're only in there 2.5 hours.
I know. We've talked about this. I do know.
I mean, I think in a structured play, but not free play.
And I think free play because it is the way children make use of everything. And when they can do it at home, unfortunately many are not, but the other thing is when they do it with their classmates with whom they are being exposed to all of this rich content that we hope they're getting, it is a different opportunity for play than when they go home and they're playing with other children. So I'm all in favor of play at home, no problems about it, but I do think that play in school is a vital part of the learning process for young children.
Can
yeah.
I just add, I too find words like something is academic or something is instructional, almost as if it's a bad guy, a bit unfortunate, because I think we've gone beyond that. When we talk about our vocabulary programs, when we talk about, we often start with storybooks, which are a meaningful based instruction. But then we provide a guided play. What we mean by guided play is teacher-scaffolded play based on certain understandings that we want children to use their words in very guided ways. In other words, we help them. And then we provide opportunities for child discovery and talk on their own. So I think this notion of play, yes, instruction, no, is a bit of a misnomer. I think most of us are seeing a trajectory where we go from more explicit instruction to less explicit instruction, knowing that children need both of those.
Let's try another question. 1 sec.
And thank the panel for having such diverse ideas. It gives us a lot of things to think about, which are very important. I'd like to make a comment about Joan's comment of having kids be able to do things with their hands. I work at the National Children's Museum, and we see tons of children who can't manipulate with scissors, who are in pre-K 4 up to 2nd grade. And what we're also seeing is teachers who are rushing them to hairy activities in the program rooms when they should be allowed to take their time and cut and learn how to do things and use the tools of science and use the tools of just everyday tools. And in the museum, like the libraries, we are seeing families that come to play together, to read together, and to do things together, whether it's free play or we're guiding the play. We're seeing that children have so little opportunity, especially children who are less affluent, have so little opportunity those times. When they come with a school group, the teacher is still in the stress mode and is still moving very quickly and wanting to move them through the museum when the child would probably benefit a lot from exploring. When we put out the big microscope, they are not using the words of science, for instance. So we see the absence of that. We've done focus groups with teachers to get them to look at our teacher kits to see if they would do it. And we find out that teachers have so little comfort with science concepts themselves, they are not able to finish some of the teacher kits that we have. So there's a lot of absence in time, there's a lot of rushing, and there's a lot of, the kids have most ability and most curious ideas about things, and what they need is time. And I'd like to see in the policy the school day slowed down a bit so that they have time and there is age-appropriate time for tools and learning at their own pace. We're so quick to get them to 3rd grade. I don't know that it needs to be so chronological as it needs to be cognitive. They need to be able to do these things when they're able to. And I also have the problem of slowing down my staff who wants them to be able to be successful in their 90-minute visit, that I have to say, no, you must leave the scissors, you must leave the hole punchers, and you must allow them to do it. So my goal is to slow it down and make the curriculum perhaps a little longer. Maybe it's not a 12-month curriculum for children who need more time. Maybe it's an 18-month, because we can't push them to the trajectory. We do have to give them the time to do what they need to do.
I think also when you think about what the Strong Start Act does is it requires a full school day for pre-K. And it just too hard to get children in and out and make so much progress in 2.5 hours. And it's not that a full school day takes care of all the needs of working mothers. We know that. But at least it gives you a chunk of time to work.
I'd like just to add one more thing, and there's a nice book by L'Oreal called Unequal Childhood, and I recommend it to my students, I recommend it to you, and it talks about the fact that working class kids and poor kids are the kids who have an opportunity to do the kind of Vygotskian play where they're out on the street and they're making up games and they're making up rules and they're doing the kinds of things that Vygotsky says makes for, and Piaget too, makes for intellectual development. And middle-class kids or advantaged kids are having play dates with mom. They need more opportunity to play than the poor kids do.
That's an interesting point, yeah.
I'm sorry, could I just make one?
Yeah, sure.
One little follow-up to what Wendy was saying, but also to what you were saying. Language is a problem here, and I recognize that. Time, I think, is maybe a better element to work with. How much time is teacher-led instruction? How much time is child-initiated learning? And there have been studies analyzing classrooms that way, and I think that's actually quite a good way to do it. And what we used to see was lots of time for child-initiated learning and time for teacher-led instruction, or whatever we want to call it. Now the balance has shifted a lot, so there's quite little periods of time for child-initiated choice or play, and long periods for teacher-led instruction. And I think that's where the frustration comes into the children. That's why Gilliam is finding these high levels of expulsion, I believe. And, you know, but you can't ever quite simplify it all too much. But I do think it's mostly a question of getting the balance right. It's not an either or as much as it is getting the balance right.
Thank you so much for the information. I really appreciate being here. I took copious notes. It is on. It certainly is. I took copious notes, and I appreciate the rigorous debate. This young lady in front of me has much more she'd like to say to you. So I appreciate that. My name is Sean Hart, and I'm with Center City Public Charter Schools, and certainly we are grappling with these issues now. I appreciate, one, the distinction between free play and instructional or structured play. There's lots more terminology that we probably need to play with to get all of this right, because people may be walking out trying to figure that out. Question that I had in particular is that we, you know, at one point you said, and thank you, Alman, for reminding me, I used to do storytelling, and watching kids' eyes light up and their gripped attention during all of that is reminding me that I need to probably go back and do some more of it. You said something that was interesting, and I'd like you to speak just a little more to it. You said that the play is particularly important for students who are coming from poor backgrounds. And I wanted to know what you meant by that. Like, more play, what kind of play? What's the research that we have that's telling us that for that particular population, play is important? And I'm particularly thinking about the time that I spent in schools that were, I opened a school for boys, and I also spent time studying schools for boys. And what we found was that when we were doing direct instruction to get kids caught up, it was helping a lot. But I don't know enough about early childhood to be able to kind of figure all of this out. So I'd love some more on that.
Well, again, the Gilliam study about expulsions is one indicator. And none of the studies are everything I would like them to be, but it is one indicator that if you don't have play in the program, the children really can get frustrated, especially the boys. I think the girls also, but the boys will act it out more. And, you know, jumping into elementary and recess, when men hear that recess is being eliminated in a lot of schools, many of them say, I could never have gotten through school without recess. And you hear that more from men than from women. You know, all that movement and play seems to be really vital. And we know that boys are having a hard time, especially lower income boys. So I think that's one indicator. The high scope program also was showing that when play was in those programs, the children did better than in the direct instructional program where it wasn't. And also I've been told, but I really need to check with high scope on this, that the Perry preschool study was based on a high scope play-based program. That's not usually said, but it wasn't just any old preschool, those children were in a good play-based program. So, and I'd have to think, and I'd be glad to talk with you afterwards about some other examples that I could think of from a research point of view. But I know from being in inner city schools and a program I often visited for children that were homeless, when children are given some support in play, they often need a bit of support, but not necessarily instructional play, which is a next level of support. Honestly, you can't tell the difference that the children are from very difficult backgrounds. That's been my experience. And when I mentioned it to a friend who was working with the homeless children, she said, well, you know, you see it when things fall apart. They fall apart faster. But when they're really engaged in play, they were so engaged. And when I would tell them stories, they were so engaged that you could not tell the difference. And I have had the same experience in an inner city school in Milwaukee, and I was doing weekly storytelling here in DC, that you can't tell the difference when you're giving children things that really nourish them. It's just that look you were talking about that you get on the faces of young children, the 3s and 4s, literally with their mouths open, drinking in the stories. And the 5s and 6s, you can kind of see the pictures forming in their mind's eye. And these things are vital for children and in preparation for reading and print literacy.
Well, I just have to comment on some of these things because we think of play as an opportunity for children to engage in rich language instruction, and in no way do I want to diminish that. But one of the things we don't and haven't recognized is that children need to play with ideas. And too many times in our schools, we are bereft of content. Absolutely bereft. You go from one thing, someone described it before, you go from one thing to another thing. It's like a cafeteria style kind of instruction. But what we know, and someone brought up beautifully before about being in museums, is when children get to concentrate on content, that is play for children. They become experts. And one of my colleagues talks about an island of expertise. So if you ever go to the schools, I want you to try it tomorrow. Go to kindergarten, go to pre-K, and find out who is the most important and popular kid in the playground. And it's that kid who is a specialist in orca whales. Now, you may not think that orca whales is the coolest thing in the world, but those kids in the kindergarten and pre-K do. They know that this is a child who has expertise in a domain, and whenever they have orca whale problems, they will go to that child and they will ask, can you tell me all about this topic? So when we think about play, we can't just think about play as something where you go into a housekeeping corner. That's the old look. The new look is getting kids to talk about ideas, and that is play for young children.
Yes.
Hi. This has been a great panel. My name is Ann Pratt from Progressive States Network. Really appreciate the dialogue. And perhaps what I'm going to ask you might be an idea for another whole panel, so bear with me. But one of the things I'm struck with in this panel, and it was live in my work in Connecticut, working with early childhood providers and trying to advocate for more money and more programming. And it was the focus on this is for low-income communities, and this is really what's going to make a difference in low-income communities. And of course, that's right, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're doing it. And I think the challenge for me in that was always, and it's actually about everyone too. Like, this is also about middle-income communities having access to affordable, high-quality care. And the moment that we bring those two interests together and build and expand this as a movement for all, not to obviously not still work on it as, you know, important for reducing the achievement gap and addressing disparities and all that. We have to do both. But I just wanted to say that the challenge of how do we also engage, and I'm sure there's lots of really good work out there that's being done, but just to highlight that as an issue of making this, you know, all of us, urban, suburban, low income, middle class, this is an issue that affects so many people in this country. And to go back to Helen's point about this is a moment where we need to be advocating for more and more resources. So we have to sort of expand that tent. And in that, I have a question, which is about the focus on parents and sort of parent outreach that Barbara mentioned, which I think is huge. And again, my experience is that makes such a difference. There is this thing that we has been growing. It's called the Parent Leadership Training Institute, which is a very focused parent leadership course that many states are taking on, and it's intersected with early care and parents from who come from diverse backgrounds, diverse communities, but it's focused on early care, and it's also about focused parent training. So my question is, have there been studies about the kinds of differences that parent leadership training programs actually make in child outcomes? Just a quick question, if anybody knows any studies that have, or that are planned.
Well, I don't know the parent leadership training per se, but certainly the parent education literature research says that it is at best modest effective. In other words, telling people how to raise their kids just isn't a very effective way of getting change. Right. I have been trying to convince the people who are doing the outreach in early childhood in Chicago, we need to build communities of change. People change in response to social referencing groups. People I know do this. They read to their kids every night. Pretty soon, if I belong to that group, I'll begin to read to my kid every night. The problem is that when the group ends, very often the intervention ends. That where this has been done as a temporary thing. After the 14 weeks is over, go back 20 weeks and nobody's reading anymore, because you're asking people to change their lifestyle for no particular reason. I have the same problem with home visiting. Our evidence on home visiting is very minimal. That going in and telling people to do different things with their infants, it's not easy to change. Those of you who've raised children know you raise them like everybody you know did, your sisters, your cousins, your neighbors.
It's a challenge. Susan, do you want to comment?
I just want to say that we have a study coming out in Early Childhood Research Quarterly that talks about a process that mitigated against SES. In other words, we found that if parents are responsive to children's questions and comments, we were able to show tremendous gains in terms of language development and expressive language in particular. So when parents you follow children's lead and were responsive to what they asked for with an extension and an enhancement, we were able to show that their SES did not matter. It was responsivity that really did.
Yes, I think we have time for, if we go, 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Mark Cebulski. I have an LLC called Great Teaching. I taught in Wisconsin in high school for 30 years. I want to make a couple of observations. First, I'll bet you everybody in this room has had a moment of aha in the middle of a walk, a run, skiing, hiking, something, where your brain went through problem solving and you didn't even know it. Am I right? That's all Joan is saying. Give them a minute to assimilate and extrapolate and come, aha, this is how it works. Not to eliminate instructional time or its importance. I don't think she's doing that. It's the balance of the whole child we are talking about here, are we not? And the physiology of making the blood run through the brain a little faster drops the anxiety, helps to extrapolate information, and helps me feel better about taking on the rest of the world when the bell rings. That's the benefit of kickball at 2:15 in the afternoon. Now, in my high school, I taught social studies, and one of the things I did in a government class is put on a simulation, which is play with curriculum, as Susan was pointing out, which I think is incredibly important as well. I put on a simulation of a court system with focus toward plea bargaining. When the kids were finished, they understood the concept and the reasoning and all of the other legal terminology that goes along with it, and all I had to do was make it happen. It was just a wonderfully produced kind of thing, and all I do was organize it, and they got it. The problem with that is, and there's only one problem, but it is very much the problem today. I gave up 2 whole days of curricular coverage by doing that, which means I had to cut and paste other things that I was trying to do to cover the curriculum. And in these days, test-based teaching, teachers shy away faster than ever. That's tragic.
I'm going to do one more question.
I'm glad I get to squeeze my question in. Thank you to the panel. I was very excited by all the comments. I feel the perspective of teachers has really been missing from our discussion this morning. We've put a lot of emphasis on how to close this word gap, but not on the who is doing the work. And I appreciate that we included families, and yes, there was a focus on some reference to what strategies we can use. But I want to do a reality check. I was a master teacher at Bank Street College for over 20 years. I was the director of a large program here in the city that's the largest Latino-serving early childhood program. The reality check I want to present, and just quickly, is our teachers are not highly qualified coming with associate and master's degrees. Our teachers have had limited access to education. Our teachers have had limited opportunities to play themselves. Our teachers have had limited opportunities to be read to and read. And so the reality check for me is, how are we going to change this when our policies and our licensing efforts are all pointing to mandated bachelor's degrees, master's degrees for early childhood? This is very hard work. Our teachers, we don't get teachers who walk in the door with a master's degree and say, oh, this is the profession I've been dying to do all my life. I have majority immigrant teachers who are coming with degrees from their countries, but the point for me is we've been using a coaching mentoring model that has been very effective in helping coordinate and build the kind of relationship building that we're talking about, what children need for teachers. And in that relationship building, we're modeling play and helping teachers to have fun with it so that they then realize, oh, I get it, this is important, I need to do this. And then the coaching and mentoring, which is job-based, means we then have an opportunity to really develop the metrics around, you're now doing these 10 things that are really important in shared book reading. You're doing these 8 things in the block area. This is really an important shift, and the most provocative part of the shift for me is I would love to see, I worked in the university, I worked at Bank Street, so I'm not trying to do something subversive, but I think the university control of mandated master's degrees is really undermining our efforts to get quality into the classrooms.
Can I answer that before I get Barbara was going to, can I say something quickly? I think what is really important or interesting about this growing focus on early learning is there is a growing focus on teachers as well. And I think everybody knows how much work there is to be done. And I think they're really interesting models. The Abbott pre-K program in New Jersey had good credentials for teachers, and it gave teachers who were working in community-based programs support, extensive support, and 4 years to get their degrees, but it also worked with the colleges. And we know we've got work on both ends, but I think there have been some models with state pre-K programs. I don't mean to be so simplistic. It's a part of the Strong Start Act that there's funding set aside to help make this possible. But I think that in elevating early learning and moving toward a pre-K system, we create an environment and a system where over time, it won't be easy because it's still less attractive to be a kindergarten teacher, that we can help support a stronger field and also compensate them better. But you know, and I think it's going to take. It takes a while, but I think there are signs of progress. It's a massive job, but you've got to get on the track.
Well,
right, we know.
we
Barbara,
had
I'll
two
give you the
models in
last word.
Chicago. One was that we paid child care centers if they would hire a qualified teacher with a BA degree and a teaching certificate. They were required to pay that teacher $40,000 a year or more. And they could work a half a day as a teacher. If they wanted to work the rest of the day, they could work as a child care employee. But what we could not do was to pay qualified teachers $40,000 a year and watch kids sleep. So we had to come up with another model. And so they hired a person with an AA degree in child development who would take care of the children for lunch and nap and after school. And they had the qualified teacher in the morning. The other arrangement we had was with the child care center would bring a preschool class to the school. They would have their 2.5, 3 hours. They would go back to the center, and another set of kids would come to the school, and they would have their pre-K. So that both groups of children had 3 hours of pre-K, and the rest of the time they spent in their child care center. And the child care center could handle more children because half of them were for most of the day away in the public school. So I think there are models where we can infuse the educational component into child care, pay people a decent salary for more education and more sophisticated work, and at the same time have good quality child care for the children who are there all day long. And our community colleges are doing a wonderful job of training their people to be the overall supervisor of the children during the day.
In Tulsa, they put public school teachers in Head Start or child care programs, which that happens in a number of places around the country. You don't have to move the children. And in Abbott, they paid the teachers in the community-based programs who deliver about 60% of the services in this highly successful program. They paid them comparable to public school teachers, both on the salary side, on the health side. They haven't gotten the retirement side, and that's a concept in the Strong Start bill. So there are models. We know we have a way to go, but I think there are lots of examples.
But you really have to put a lot of pressure on to get the child care centers to be willing to pay teachers. They keep saying, but that's not our salary scale, and we had to really keep the pressure on to get the child care centers to do that.
You have to, and in Pennsylvania, they have a minimum salary that they'll pay if you're in a community-based program for a pre-K teacher. So I think there are, when there's a will, and the money. There's a way. Maybe that's a good way to end this. We always end with the money.
I'd like to add just one more thing about the play argument. I don't think any of us are saying that children don't need play and don't need free play and don't need an opportunity to practice what they already know. I think the real question is, how do you use it, and where we have constraints on the time of children in school, are there some ways to use play as a teaching tool as opposed to having an opportunity just to play? I think kids do need the opportunity just to play.
I think this was a tremendous panel. Obviously, this is a really important topic, and this shed a lot of light on it, and we're grateful for all of you. And grateful for AFT for making it possible.